Hello, I'm Toycat and welcome back to another second channel geography video. This is everyone's favourite series where I talk about geography and the world and stuff. And today I wanted to talk about a fascinating part of capital cities because we've been talking about capital cities so much recently when it comes to countries with multiple capital cities, countries that change their capital cities, or really just capital cities with weird rules attached. So in today's video I wanted to talk about the question of is it possible to have no capital city for your country? And the simple answer to that question is not really, but some countries do anyway. And the long answer is there's three types of countries which don't have a capital city. There's the type of country where officially they don't, but really they do. There's the second type where they don't, but like the international community just says they do, and then it's kind of done that way. And then there's the third type where you do not have a capital city for one reason or other. There's 4 countries that do not have those, and I wanted to go through all 3 of these again in somewhat brief terms in today's video. So let's get straight into it, shall we? And let's start the first type, which is a country which does not really recognize their capital. It's not called their capital anyway, but the international community does. So the biggest example of this is France and Paris. So Paris is of course the capital of France. Everyone knows that, but it's not ever officially mentioned to be the capital. It's not mentioned in the constitution or any of these like documents. It just happens to be where all of their government is met, and then they just agree that yeah, I guess that is the capital. There's also examples of this found in Portugal. Lisbon isn't really officially the capital, and the more famous example is the Netherlands of Amsterdam. So most of the government stuff actually goes on in The Hague, but the Amsterdam is like the tourist city. It's the biggest city, and it's the one which gets all the people in, and it's officially known as the capital. And even on Google Maps, so you can see it says the capital, but it's not officially referenced as that in any form, and it doesn't have any of the requirements to be. It's just kind of accepted that Amsterdam is the capital of the Netherlands. Fun little fact that you might not have known. However, the second example is a little bit different to that because again, Switzerland. This came up in again in the past video. People are like, no, Toycat, Switzerland does have a capital. It's Bern. Trust me, I learned it in school, and therefore 100% legit. However, again, that's not quite how this works. So bear in mind, Switzerland is one of the weirdest countries in the world. Like calling it even a country is a little bit weird because it's a collection of a bunch of cantons, which are, people from each canton feel like they're, very strongly aligned to that. So for instance, people from the Zurich canton feel like they are Zurich citizens, then Switzerland's like that kind of secondary thing. It's almost like the US, but like on a whole nother level basically, and therefore the capital city of Switzerland being Bern is kind of one of these things where it's like on a technicality almost, because Bern is the de facto capital city, but it's not de jure. It's not mentioned anywhere. They do not recognize it as a capital city, but they do call it a federal city, which a lot of places just consider that's close enough. However, bear in mind, none of the judiciary is done here, and a lot of actual presidential stuff isn't done here, and basically Bern is only the capital because it's the closest thing Switzerland has. Switzerland doesn't want a capital, Switzerland doesn't need a capital, but they have it as Bern for when they do need to have one. So yeah, a lot of Swiss people don't consider Bern to be the capital. Some people do, but a lot of people consider their own city to be like basically the capital. Like, well, I mean, Zurich's the capital of Zurich, so whatever, that's close enough for me. And that's just something fascinating you might not know. Same with Genevan, same with like people from all over Switzerland. They don't really consider themselves to have a capital, and it's not in the document. It's not in any document anywhere. They don't acknowledge it in that way, but they just accept Bern is what people consider to be the capital. That's where people go, and therefore Bern is kind of the capital. And actually, while we're here, Switzerland is like strange on whole other levels. They have 7, instead of having like a president or like a head of state, they have a federal council. They get 7 people in there who all collectively represent Switzerland, and if they ever need to have like one person do something, they have a first among equals where every year someone rotates being like the official head of state. But Switzerland doesn't really have a head of state. Switzerland doesn't really have a capital city, and Switzerland doesn't really have most of the things that a country has because it's a very weirdly organized country, and it's cool in a lot of ways. It's fascinating, but it is something you gotta keep in mind. So Switzerland, very strange country, only technically has a capital city because the world forced it on it, and it's one of those like secondary definitions. So what about countries which do not have a capital city in the slightest? And we're going to include just countries that do not have one at all, because for some reason Google Maps doesn't recognize Liechtenstein's capital, which is Liechtenstein capital, which is of course Vaduz over here. It's not recognized by Google. Either is Andorra la Vella over here. So for some reason a lot of like tiny countries don't have their capitals recognized, but there are 3 city-states in the world which also do not have capitals. So the first one over here is Monaco. Monaco is a city-state. The entire country is one city. So you can argue that the whole country is a capital city, but isn't that redundant to say that country is its own capital city? Imagine if you said, what the capital city of Switzerland is Switzerland. You wouldn't be able to accept that. But in the case of the city-state of Monaco, then it kind of just like, it's what you have to accept. Like Monaco, capital city, Monaco. So the second example is of course that of the Vatican City, the smallest country in the world. It's just one city, and the capital of the Vatican City, I mean, it's not mentioned anywhere, it's not needed anywhere, but it is the Vatican City, but it covers the entire thing again, and therefore like, is that a city? You can make your own arguments. And then the third city-state, which is independent, because Hong Kong is now so is Macau, by the way. If you consider these separate countries, they count too. But because they're part of China by a bunch of official definitions, Hong Kong had the same thing, where Hong Kong was Hong Kong, Macau was Macau, and then finally the biggest example is, or the last example is Singapore. So Singapore is a city-state. It's one of the most successful city-states in the world, or the most successful, you could argue. But Singapore's capital is Singapore because it is just one huge city, or one pretty big city. I mean, depends how big a city you consider it. But yeah, Singapore is a very fascinating country. Again, there's so many countries I'd love to just dedicate like a whole one of these things, talking about like, oh yeah, so they were almost forced to leave the Union. Like, they're one of the few examples of a country which didn't like willingly secede. They were almost forced out. Like, again, a fascinating example of Singapore there. And then finally, we've got the last country without capital, which I did mention briefly in the previous video, but it is the example of Nauru. So the easiest way to find Nauru, because again, like when you're looking around in like the in the Polynesian area between Australia and like Hawaii, I guess it's hard to find countries, but Nauru is found just under the equator, just over here. And Nauru is one of the world's least populated territories, and in fact, it's the world's least populated territory, depending on how you want to consider it. But yeah, Nauru does not have a capital, despite being an independent country, because again, their population is so tiny that they just don't really have any cities. Sometimes you'll see Yarran listed as their capital city, but nowhere is this really, again, it's not really a city, it's a district, and you can't really have a capital district, because then what's that? So yeah, Nauru does not have a capital city because it doesn't have any cities, and it doesn't really have anything close enough to a city, and it doesn't really have anything close enough to all the other definitions, and that's why Nauru is the strangest example of a country without a capital city. So yeah, there you go. Let's show you a little bit of Nauru, by the way, because look at their runway, isn't this nice? So yeah, basically those are the examples of countries without capital cities. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Second channel, don't care. Goodbye.